So he's like, okay, so that's totally fine. Like that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like the market is shifted. So how do we dive into your business to decouple yourself from the market? That's the ultimate goal. Because there was actually a saying the night before, but he reiterated it. He's like, there's going to be people, as we see in this room, who are wildly successful in this market, and there's going to be people who go out of business in this market. But the secret is it's the same market. So it's really all about your systems and the choice that you make as to which person you're going to be. And so that was the second time I had heard that over this last week. And I'm like, yeah, he's absolutely right. Like ultimately, there's people that are wildly successful. So like, if they can do it, why can't we, right? Why can't I? And so he's like, I'm going to take a second and I'm going to break down how I help my top producing teams think about their business. And so, you know, then he kind of asked a little bit, he's like, someone shared their business model with me. And so someone's like, I have a team of 4, 1 ISA, 1 marketing advisor, and we do most of our, we get most of our business through organic video content. He's like, great. And then there was another mega team there. They're like, we have 40 people. We do Zillow Flex. And he's like, great. And that was one of the teams that was behind on their goals because Zillow Flex, like related stuff, is all down this year because interest rates up, buyers were down. So he was kind of, you know, there's a little bit of small talk around that, but ultimately he's like, all right, let's do an exercise. And that's actually what I'm going to try to recreate for you here. Although again, I'm not Sharran, so it might not be exactly perfect. So if you have any questions as we go, obviously make sure to raise your hand and ask them. So, so you guys can see this. Yeah. Kristen, I'm watching you because I think you're the only one with your camera on. So, so ultimately, you know, he was going through this exercise and he didn't have like slides per se. He just had like a flipboard, you know? And so let's go through how any brokerage model or any team model should be decoupling and looking at their business to decouple from the market. Because once you can do this, then it doesn't really matter what the market does. You're going to be able to fluctuate with it and be successful, you know? So he goes, any business or any team can be broken down into 3 buckets, right? And you've got basically your traffic. Where do you get people into your ecosystem? Like every business needs traffic. These are the people that you talk to on a daily basis. Every successful business needs systems in place, and then every successful team needs skills, right? And so he was able to kind of break these 3 buckets down. And he said, but within each one, there's 3 subsets. And so we talked a little bit about traffic. He's like, how do you guys get traffic? We were all kind of sharing. Organic traffic, he said, is kind of like the best because it's coming for you, but it's the hardest to, you can't turn the dial on organic traffic, right? Because organic traffic might be, you know, you do video marketing, right? Or something like that, where you're putting yourself out there, even to a certain extent, like referrals. Like if you get organic referrals, which actually video marketing helps get referrals. We've talked about this before in the past, but you can't make someone move from Miami to San Diego and then use you, right? So like, there's no way to like turn that dial up. So while these are foundationally really, really good ways to get business, ultimately, like you want all your business to come organically. In certain markets, you can't just like turn those on. And so you have to have some paid strategy as well. And then lastly would be the activities, or what we call like the sweat equity. That's what we call it on our team, is like, what are you doing? Door knocking, farming, cold calling, right? Stuff like that. So then he did talk about paid. This is where you would get Google you know, Google pay-per-click or Facebook leads or Zillow market share or realtor.com. Geographic farming to a certain extent, you know, falls under paid. And so we talked about like the paid strategies, and, you know, some people shared like how basically they're doing their paid strategy and where they're spending their money. And then lastly was activities. There was one team there from Colorado who basically does only client events and stuff. And then they have like a geographic farm, and then they like work their farms really hard. They do like event pumpkin patch, stuff like that in their farm. So those are called activities, basically, where they are just doing stuff to like generate their business. So any successful business is going to get their traffic in from one of 3 ways. And then that kind of summed this up. And then he moved on to systems. He said every successful business will have 3 different types of systems that'll fall into these buckets. Lifetime nurture. This is your CRM, right? Ultimately, every successful business has to have a solid CRM in place. Obviously, like that could be a proprietary from your brokerage. That could legitimately be a Google Sheet that you have everybody's phone number, email address, and like, you know, some notes about that person. He basically said, he's like, everybody says you could just use a Google Sheet. He's like, but if you're trying to run a successful business, you better not be using a Google Sheet in this day and age. Like there's so many CRM options out there. You don't have to use like a $500, you know, like conversion or Chime or something like that. You know what I mean? But like ultimately you need like a solid CRM. And you can't think of every single client as just coming in and the commission on that client. Legitimately, like every single client that comes in should have a lifetime expected value on them. For the sake of this, like, don't think of your clients as money, but like they should have a lifetime expected value. So if you have a client coming in, theoretically, if they're going to buy with you, but they're 30 years old, you can kind of anticipate that they're probably going to sell, buy, sell, buy. So there's probably going to be 5 transactions throughout the lifetime of a client based on the age of where they're at in their life cycle. Maybe more, maybe less. Maybe then also they'll have referrals for you, but there's probably going to be 5 transactions. So if you can like foresee what those transactions would kind of be, you can almost put a lifetime expected value on a client, which means you're going to take a lot better care of that client than you would for just the single condo that they want to go see on Saturday, right? So you start to think about it a little bit differently. And then secondarily, he's like, what a lot of people do here too, is that you're doing all these activities, especially like paid, if you're thinking about like online pay-per-click and stuff like that, and you're putting them into your CRM, but then like, that you're not treating them like your clients, you're treating them like prospects. And he's like, I need you to do away with the word prospects or potential clients. Anybody in your CRM, any lead, these are clients. You almost treat every single prospect like a client, like you would if they were a client. And so he's like, it's really hard, especially as you start to do some business, because you start to get a little bit picky and choosy about who you're working with. But ultimately, he's like, the person picking up their phone or leaving their contact information from you, they raised their hand. Like if they picked up and they called you, it's like, do you realize how hard it is for someone to call you in this day and age? And then he kind of shared a story about his wife, who loves this specific Thai restaurant. It's her favorite restaurant in Orange County where they live, but they don't do online ordering. You have to pick up and you have to call. And so like 9 times out of 10, she will actually go online and order food from somewhere else that she doesn't like as much because she doesn't want to pick up the phone and just talk to someone at the restaurant. And he's like, you be realistic with yourself. He's like, all of us are kind of the same way. And ultimately, like, we don't want to call people and we don't want to be called. So if someone picks up the phone to call you, whether that be through like an online paid thing or something like that is super hard to get someone to do that. And like, that's your client now. You got to treat them like your client, not just a prospect. They're not just a random lead. I took notes on that entire kind of session, but that all fell under lifetime nurture, and really like going hard for the actual clients that are in your CRM. Next, he talked about appointment setting. And he's like, typically, like as you start to grow, this is going to be like your ISA department or some sort of an admin role. He did talk about actually setting up, he talked about virtual assistants here. He said that there's a service called Assistantly, that allows you to do virtual assistant work, but on 10-hour blocks instead of 40 hours. Because the one catch with virtual assistants so far has been that you have to buy them for like 40 hours a month, and that's really expensive. It's like $2,000 a month. And so like, if you don't have like the amount of work for a virtual assistant to give them 40 hours of work, that could be a little bit overkill. But Assistantly offers a 10-hour package, and it's like $500 or $600. No, it's like $400 or $500 or something like that. So that's a really good way to get into like virtual assistant work, or in this case, having an ISA would be the best way to do it. But like ultimately, as the operator of the business, as the CEO or operator of the business, you should be like waking up with calendars on your appointment or appointments on your calendar. So ultimately, like you should be waking up and seeing that you have 6 appointments today, or 3 or 7 or 2, whatever that number is, but you should have some sort of process, usually working in like an ISA, working with your CRM to set these appointments for you. You can even set up, he recommended setting up like a Calendly link that you can use. So you can send those to people like as you're talking to them throughout the day, week, or month. And then you can have that even posted on like your social medias and stuff like that. So if people wanted to request time on your calendar, it like goes right into it so that you're not like managing all your stuff all the time. He also took a second there and kind of like broke down how, like what happens like when you wake up and you don't have any appointments on your calendar. It creates like this anxiety of like, well, what am I going to do today? And then you start to kind of just piece fill it in. And so having some sort of a structure between your CRM and some sort of like appointment setting, either ISA or calendar or admin type thing, is really, really important. And then last on this systems thing is a referral machine. And so what this is basically some kind of like your past client follow-up, as well as like agent to agent referrals. He was just talking about a way to have referrals coming in. And so I actually asked the question here too, because I was like, hey, like I actually get a lot of referrals in from agents across the country, but like it's really tough to like forecast that out because, you know, if I did 18 deals by referral last year. I can't just say, well, I want to do 25 this year. That's, kind of like a normal increase, because I can't control agent referrals coming into me. And he's like, yeah, he's like, you're absolutely right. He's like, with referrals, the best way that you can generate referrals is to make yourself the brand and continue putting out content to stay relevant. But it is very hard to forecast it. So I actually didn't even get like a solid answer there, but he was basically like, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is kind of the one thing that you can't control when those happen. But it's really important that you have some sort of like past client follow-up and or agent to agent follow-up if you're doing like agent to agent contact, to make sure that the referrals continue coming in. And then he moved on a little bit, and I'm going to need some participation at the very end of this. But so he moved on to skills. And we talked a little bit about this, basically saying like, this is the business's like effectiveness. And so like every business needs an extremely smooth sales process. And so we talked a lot here because he was saying like, do you have buyer guides? Do you have a listing appointment? What happens when you get a new lead in? Do they go to your ISA and then they go to your agent? And then when you go to set up the appointment, do you go out and you meet them with a buyer's guide? And then from the buyer's guide, do you have a follow-up? Do you intro them to a lender, right? Basically a smooth sales process that is effective and just, and without a hitch. And so he's like, what typically happens is all of us in this room, and probably all of us on this call, are in the position that we're in because we're very charismatic, right? We like to like, we're people. And so like, we don't have these systems and processes in place because we kind of just wing it, because that's kind of just how we do it, because we're the salespeople and like, yada, yada, yada. He's like, but the thing is like, you need a consistent formula, because the client, when they come into your ecosystem and they call you, they don't know, like we know that the next step is to get pre-qualified, or that the next step is this, the next step is this, because we've done it 250 or 400, 500 times or whatever. But the client has done this maybe once, or maybe 0 times, or maybe twice. And so they don't know what to expect. So we talked here about using the phrase, here's what happens next. And how that is the best possible phrase that you can give to a client at almost any position in the entire process. Because like you could sit down with them and say, okay, cool. You've gotten, you met them for the initial consultation or something like that. You've given them the buyer's guide. You've set them up with the lender. And then you're going to say, okay, cool. Here's what happens next. Or when you sit down and you open an escrow, that's one of like the most exciting times for a client. And so you're going to sit down as their trusted advisor. You're going to say, okay, here's what happens next. You're going to get reached out by escrow. You're going to have an earnest money deposit. You're going to have to send the contract over to your lender so they can get started. And then we're going to schedule the inspection and the appraisal, right? Whatever the next steps happen to be, that phrase, here's what happens next, is the most safe phrase that like a client can hear from you, because you're their trusted advisor. And ultimately, like, what's happening next. But like for us, sometimes we're just like, great, we got an escrow, like da, 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 da. But like, we're not conveying to the client exactly that feeling of safety that we're in control. And so a lot of times they're just left in the dark, and it leads to like this friction between the agent and the client, because we're not conveying that we either know what's happening next or that we're like in the loop, And so he actually mentioned here too, on like the listing process as well, like, he's like, how many of you guys have taken listings? And the communication with the seller has been spotty, right? Because ultimately, like, the sellers are listing their property with you. This may be the first or maybe second time or whatever that they've ever done this. And so like, and to them, it's their biggest asset ever. So it makes sense. But for us, we have 4 other clients and we're trying to generate more. And so like the communication between you and your seller, especially right now when properties are going to sit for 30 or 60 days instead of 30 or 60 minutes, is very, very important to have a system in place where you're like, hey, Mr. Seller, like, awesome, we're getting ready to go on the market. Here's how I provide my updates. And that was a really big key takeaway for me too, is because like, I would use, he's like, how many of you guys in the room ahead of time with a strong sales process where you're like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's how I provide my updates. Twice a week, I do an update every Friday. We call that a assess and a deploy, where we assess the previous week and then we deploy. We share with you what we're going to deploy for the following week. And then if anything else important comes up along the way, I will call you personally and we'll go over that together. And so like basically like setting the expectation of having something like that with your seller clients ahead of time is so much more comforting to the seller, even though, you know, you do want them to know that they can reach out to you, but ultimately, like, you want to make sure that the stuff is streamlined and it's a solid process. You're not just winging it, because if you're just winging it, the seller feels that you're just winging it. And then it's like, well, do they even care? Or are they really on top of this type of stuff, you know? Smooth onboarding. This was really, really good too, is because he was talking about, this is actually where he carried over into the, here's what happens next. When the client calls you or sits down with you, right? And then they go through this process, they're so uncertain about everything that having some sort of a 5-step process or a 7-step process or a 4-step process about exactly what happens next is the most comforting thing. So I think I actually got ahead of myself. I think he talked about here's what happens next on the smooth onboarding, where he said, like, this is when you're intaking a client, this is like the most exciting, important thing that's going on to that client. They just hired you to go buy a house or go sell a house. So it's really, really important to you to lay out the next steps. He actually, I'm not going to be able to go into this here because I don't have the calendars on here, but I don't know if anybody on here is using the calendar close when they go on listing appointments. But he said here that this is single-handedly the most effective way to close listing appointments. And it's called the calendar close. And what he'll do is he'll bring a calendar with him to the listing appointment. And then as he's there, he'll say, okay, cool. So when do you need to sell the house by? Like, what's your drop dead date of leaving the house to go to your next thing? And they'll usually say, oh, okay, it's not like a super rush or whatever. And then he'll pick a long thing out where he'll say, oh, okay, so is this like a 2023, 2024 plan? And then they'll say, oh, no, well, we have to be out by August 23rd because of something school. And he's like, okay, got it. So then he'll go to August 23rd on the calendar and he'll say, okay, let's walk backwards from here. So basically, like, you'll need 2 days, right, to pack and move. So that'll put us back to August 21st. He's like, it takes about 30 days to close the escrow because the buyers are going to need to get financing and then they'll have their inspection contingency. So now we're back to July 23rd. He's like, typically in this market, it takes about 30 days on the market to get it into escrow. So now we're back to June 23rd. He's like, we're going to need about 2 weeks to do, you know, as we talked about when I got here, there's a couple things you want to fix in the backyard. Plus we want to maybe paint the outside and then stage it. He's like, that's about 10 days. I have a painter. I have an inspector for you. I can get them on the, you know, I can reach out to them now and see what their schedule's like. That's about 2 weeks. We're on to June 15th. Or whatever. And then I need about 7 days ahead of time for pre-marketing. What that allows me to do is test the market based on certain prices on the range we talked about. So ultimately, like, for you to leave on August 15th or whatever I said, you actually have to get the process started on June 4th or whatever. And so having that calendar there, basically, like, it puts the entire, like, mind to ease of the seller to know that, like, you've got this handled. Like, you've thought about every step of the way. You have contacts for everything that they're going to need along the way. And, like, at that point, like, they're not hiring anybody else. Like, and then he threw a couple, like, tricks, and not tricks, but, like, little things. He's like, now my guess is there's going to be some sort of family vacation or birthday in here. And he's like, 9 times out of 10, it's a family of 4. They have a birthday or some sort of, like, trip planned in there. And so be like, well, we got to give it a couple of days off each because I know you don't want to be painting the house while you're having a birthday party. And so, like, basically, and then they're like, oh yeah. And he's like, usually, like, they go and grab the family calendar and they go through all this thing. He's like, you've already won the appointment at this point. But he's talking about, more so than winning the listing appointment, he's talking about the sense of security you're giving to your clients, whether that be on the listing side or the selling side or buyer side. If you are showing that you have this smooth process put in place, as opposed to what 90% of us do is we go in, we wing it. We walk into the house, we take off our shoes, we're fumbling with our stuff. We don't know where to sit, you know, all this type of stuff because we don't have a smooth process. And then lastly was a kind delivery. And he talked a little bit about sales techniques there. It's like the efficiency of, like, how you get people on the phone, how do you convert the appointments, doing it with a kind delivery and being really on top of your skill set there. So, like, having script practices and things like that. So what I want to do here, and I see that, like, obviously we have people on the call, but everybody's kind of muted. So this is going to be tough to do, but so what I'll do is I'm just going to do myself, right? And so what he did was each time he went around the room for each of these and he asked everybody in the room, all 30 people, basically, like, what, here, let me give this, like, a color so you can see the green, yellow, and red exercise. Like, who's doing this section really, really effectively, who's kind of in the middle, and then who's doing this really, really poorly. And then, do I not have, like, a color paint? Can I do this? Oh, maybe this. Okay. So he's like, okay, organic, who's doing a really, really good job of like organic marketing, right? And so there was like everybody in the room raised their hand, and then there was a green for that. And then he's like, okay, who's doing a really good job with paid marketing? And then he's like, okay, that was a yellow. And basically, to save you guys the whole thing here, because I don't actually know how to do all this stuff, basically like the entire board was like yellow. There was a couple people that were, I think it was smooth sales process, because of the way he explained it, it was actually like in the red. A lot of people were like, holy shit, like I don't have a very smooth sales process. I kind of just go in and wing it. And then everything was yellow. I think green was lifetime nurture. Everybody said that they're really good with having a CRM set up and some sort of action plans or something like that. But for the most part, everything was yellow. And he was like, look, he's like, most people are in the same boat as you are. And this is a room of like top producing agents or whatever. And not everybody has it like figured out. And a lot of times it's only like one small change to take you from yellow to green or red to yellow. And so like ultimately, like you shouldn't fret about it too much, and like basically take some of these tactics and like put them in place. So he's like, if you do organic content, so you're putting out 2 to 3 videos a week, and you have a successful YouTube channel, and then you're really effective at messaging all the people and getting those people to become clients or setting up agent to agent referrals. He's like, it's really easy to just look at your organic content for the past month and find the 2 videos that produce or that effectively did really, really well, the ones that did the best, and then throw money behind them and make it a paid ad. So like, you don't have to have a full strategy about paid ads and like where to place them. He's like, you can, and you can learn that up too, but it's really, really, it's the smallest thing. You can just literally go and spend $10 behind a really well producing YouTube ad and make it a paid ad. And then now you can improve your organic to paid strategy. And so I thought that was really, really good. He kind of talked about like the importance of, he kept harping on the importance of having action plans and people in your CRM, and then having like somebody, either a team member or a virtual assistant, basically living in that CRM, making sure that they're being contacted, you know, every single day, every other day, especially like those old leads that you've generated and stuff like that, who maybe haven't like come good yet, that you can actually have people within there setting appointments for you from your CRM. But I mean, that's kind of the overview. So this is what I took away from it. Obviously, I shared kind of some keynotes as I went through all this type of stuff. Like what, if any, like what questions do you guys have, or like what comments do you guys have about this kind of like layout and overview of how he broke down like the typical business of like a top producing agent? Don't all rush at once.
I just think it's interesting how just operating as a business, you know, versus, you know, waking up today and I guess I'll figure out what's going on, and I guess I better post a video today, and maybe I'll try this tomorrow. And so, I mean, I think that's the takeaway that I'm seeing here is, you know, I know that for as well as I've done, if I was a commercial business, I would fail using the strategy that I run my real estate business off of.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And this was all kind of eye-opening for me, because I realized I was red in the sales process and the onboarding. And I think because one of the things he was saying is like, okay, everybody in here is a team leader or whatever, top producer. And so like, you are really, really good at what you do. And he said it kind of like mockingly. He's like, you are really, really good. You know how to talk to everybody and you know how to do all this type of stuff. But he's like, but do your team members, you know what I mean? And he's like, basically like, every team member is about going to operate on a 50 to 70% effectiveness as the team leader, just based on skill set, time in the market, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, and every team leader thinks they're a 10, but they're not. They're really like a 7. He's like, which means that every team leader or team member is really like a 5. You know what I mean? Like a 5 in skill set and all that type of stuff. He's like, so every time you get an inbound lead and you give it to a team member, there's like half of a chance that they're actually doing a good job. You know what I mean? And it's not necessarily their fault. It's probably like an effectiveness thing, but there's holes in everybody's business, whether we can see them or not. You know what I mean? And so like for me, I was like, holy crap, he's absolutely right. I've been at Real for 2 months now. I left Compass and I haven't even redone my buyer's guides yet. And we had such a cool buyer's guide, like we had a process, but like, I'm like, there's a gaping hole here because I haven't actually finished out my sales process over here. And I was like taking mad notes. I'm like, I need to update this. I need to update this. Like there's what I thought used to be probably like a yellow green is now a red, because it's such an afterthought that I haven't taken a buyer in a while that I'm like, holy crap, there's a big hole there. What have my team members even been giving out as they've been taking these new buyer leads? But it was real eye-opening experience there. And then the smooth onboarding too, it was like, he was kind of sharing the thing about, obviously I took away here's what happens next as like a real kind of key kind of safety phrase. But like, I was thinking about when I bought my house. So I bought my house and I was like, and I'm a real estate agent and I bought my house and I was still having these emotional kind of feelings as you're going through it. So to have someone who's like, basically like, here's what happens next. I'm in control of this. Don't worry. We'll take care of this together. I've got recommendations, as you need, as you see fit, if you need a painter, plumber, all that type of stuff, is a really, really strong phrase to be incorporating in. One key, I don't know why I just remember this now. He mentioned that you want to be using the word specialist, not assistant. So like if you're getting to the point where you have showing assistants, right? So you have a showing specialist. If you have like an ISA, which would be like an inside sales assistant or something like that, you know what I mean? You want to be using the word specialists, like an appointment specialist or something, because not only does it give authority to the role, but it also empowers that person. And so like having a team member who's like, oh, this is my showing assistant versus this is my showing specialist. It's just a small little word kind of to shift off of there. And then in the appointment setting, I just want to, I know I'm all over the place, but in the appointment setting, he actually shared a really good tactic where he called it authority framing. And how basically like when you have someone calling for you, like an ISA, or you could do this yourself too, but like ultimately if you're the point, like if someone's calling on behalf of you, what you're going to say is basically you're going to have this person say, hey Scott, my name is Mark, I'm calling on behalf of Jason. Jason wanted me to call you to say X. Right, as opposed to just saying, "Hey, Mark, it's Mark," or "Hey, Scott, it's Mark with Jason's team. I just wanted to call you." It's called authority framing, and so by having the ISA or the person say, "Hey, I'm calling on behalf of Jason. Jason wanted me to reach out for X." So what's going to happen onto the person on the other side of the phone is they're not going to want to kill the messenger. And so like they're not going to shut down. They're not going to hang up. Very unlikely they're going to hang up on the person calling on behalf of someone else, usually. Or at least be in like they're going to be in a much more receptive mood because like nobody wants to basically kill the messenger is how he said it. And so he was trying to convey that authority framing is a really strong way for someone to call on behalf of you, whether that be team members calling on behalf of you, circle dialing or whatever, calling around a listing. Hey, Mr. Neighbor, my name is Jason. I'm calling on behalf of Scott. We just sold this house in your neighborhood. Wanted to let you know how that impacted your sale. Let's put together a comparative market analysis for you. But starting off with the authority framing, he actually mentioned it later too in the update part. So, one way to like have your clients who are getting updates from you as the listing side, say, as opposed to having a team member send them the market update every Friday, because like a lot of teams in the room, they're like, yeah, we have a team member that sends them the market update Friday. We had 4 showings, we got 1 inquiry, we had 74 impressions, we had whatever. So instead of the assistant sending that out to the seller, the assistant should put that together, send it to you, and then you should send that to the seller, not CC you on it, but basically send it to you because it needs to come from you. Because if the assistant just sends it to you or sends it to the seller might be like, well, does my listing agent even know all this stuff? You know what I mean? Or if they just CC you on it, they might think, oh, is my listing agent just finding out all this the same time I'm finding out all this? But by having the assistant send it to you and then you send it to your seller with like a recap, like, yeah, I saw this, that's exactly right. Here you go, Scott. I just wanted to get this over to you. Now you're actually framing it with an authority like that. You saw all this, you verified all this information, you already knew all this stuff, and you're now sending it up. So you can have the assistant do your work for you, but you need to authority frame it before you send it off to your seller. So that was 2 ways that he used the tactic of authority framing, both in the call setting area, like on the appointment side, and then also in like the market update side of things, So anyways, that was a key tactic. That authority framing, along with the calendar close, along with the here's what happens next, like on the smooth onboarding or on the smooth sales process, were my 3 biggest key takeaways, along with the idea that I had holes in my business in a couple of these extra areas. So I was really like kind of identifying where exactly I'm going to spend my next couple of weeks, making sure I batten up those holes. But by doing this effectively and knowing each of these different sections, you're going to be able to effectively like decouple yourself from the market so that you can be running a successful business, like what Scott just said there, as opposed to just kind of winging it. I used to say to like some team members, like, or like early on, I was like, I felt like years 1 and 2, you're just kind of figuring out how to open a lockbox, you're just figuring out how to be a real estate agent. And then years, 3 through 5, you're really understanding how to effectively like run your business like a business, as opposed to just winging it like, like a normal real estate agent. So it's funny that you said that, because you're absolutely right. And even now at year 10, it is still interesting to like see these little holes. Like when I spend money, I still spend money way too freely. Like I don't run it like a business like I should. I tend to say yes to stuff, and I spend way more than I should, usually on like some sort of a marketing thing or some sort of video thing. But I don't necessarily run my finances like a strict business like I should. And so like that was a revelation there too, as he was talking about this, that he didn't like dive too much into finances, but I did have that self-realization too. So what else? Anybody else have any feedback or any questions about the process? Sorry, I couldn't explain it a little bit better. So real secret, I was talking to Sharran after this session. I'm going to bring him down to San Diego. We're going to do an in-person event here, probably in December, maybe January, but it doesn't help 90% of you who are on this call who aren't in San Diego. Well, cool. If there's no more feedback or no more questions, I think it would be a good place to end it. Stop sharing. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for jumping on. Hopefully there were some good key takeaways from that. And hopefully we get to impart that. Here's what happens next. Remember that. That was my biggest key takeaway. Cool, guys. All right. Well, thanks for jumping on. We have one more session next week. We're going to finish with a bang. We're going to talk about online lead generation through Google pay-per-click, Facebook leads, stuff like that. Not like actual like paid lead generation. So we're going to jump into that too. So cool. Awesome. Bye.